I think, some speed endurance is looks like a very huge issue. Like you could handle like a long distance very well, and also you can handle a very good 200 meters. But staying in between, being like a 1500 miler type of person, you need a lot of speed endurance. I think that's how I like look at it. I know Nathan has a lot more probably experience coaching, and he could literally probably have something,
Yeah, so I was gonna say like I think the first thing is like what, because are you still in college? Are you out of college or what's your
I just got out of high school.
Oh, dang, never mind. Sweet.
Yeah.
So yeah, here's what I'll say. Like you're still crazy young,
Mhm.
as far as like aerobic strength, as far as development, as far as PRs. Like I'm under impression that all aerobic development is centered around threshold work, right?
Mhm.
So since you're so young, people who are in high school or even in college have the ability to kind of push their bodies really hard in like interval workouts, all that kind of stuff. So what you're probably seeing is just an ability to push and fight and hit these crazy times, but you might not have the aerobic to kind of back it up in a race. So I would say, I don't know exactly what your high school training was, but I would say if you can get some more threshold work in, if you could work on volume, you could start putting some of those interval times, um, or at least you can get those interval times closer to the fitness you want for like the actual races,
Yeah.
if that makes sense.
Yeah. So the issue was I think in cross country I had a little bit better of a training plan. Like I ran 16-13, but I was doing a kind of set system where we would do two, maybe three workouts a week. One of them was always I made it an effort to make sure that it was threshold to moderate effort. And then the other one was always like I did mile repeats a lot. I would do mile repeats at 5K pace almost every week.
Oh wow.
So, yeah. So I would do those two sessions each week, and then I would have a long run that would usually get a little bit faster at the end. Um, and I saw pretty good results. Like my fitness felt great, but the issue was that my coach would have me do some of these workouts like 2 or 3 days right before a race, like the mile reps at 5K pace. I would do those like 2, 3 days out. I remember one of the weeks I had was Sunday. I did a 5 mile tempo, 5:35 average. And I was like, okay, I'm probably not going to do a workout tomorrow. The next day I did 4 by mile from 5:11 down to 5:06. And then Tuesday I had easy run. Wednesday I had 5K race where I ran 16:30. Then 2 days off with just like easy running. And then another 5K that was a hilly course. And I ran the best on my team, like a 17:49 at one of the hardest courses in Delaware.
Oh
So
wow.
I
Yeah. Yeah, I was gonna say like, I mean, even and again, I don't know like your coach's like training plan and what he's trying to get out of it, and whether there's like a master plan that I can't quite see from just like a weak view, but and that yeah, like in that kind of frame you gave me, like that's a lot of intensity. Like I'm gonna be honest with you, doing mile repeats at 5K pace is like brutally hard.
Mhm.
That is beyond impressive that you're
I
even pulling that off, right?
I've
And so
seen
even
yeah, sorry to interrupt, but I've seen a lot of people rather break it down into Ks or 800s for 5K work.
Mhm. Yeah, and so like what's like how do I so when you're doing interval work, obviously there's a max load that you're trying to get to, right? So like it's usually like 2 to 2.5 times whatever you're racing. But the more you bulk it up, the higher that intensity becomes, right? And so you bulk it up because you're trying to force adaptation. But when you're doing paces like that, those paces don't develop you per se. Like you're so young that anything that you do technically still develops you. But when you're doing paces like that, what you're trying to do is like force out wherever your talent level is at, right? And so like the issue becomes that if you're doing all these workouts at these high intensity levels, right, you're getting to the point where you're reaching whatever your max fitness is. Let's say it's 1530. You're getting to the point where you're reaching that. But the problem is you're buried under so much intensity that your body's tired and it's technically not actually um making you a better runner. It's just whatever you have, it's trying to get you there under whatever means possible. So in a cross country season where you're training for 8 to 10 weeks, pending when you start, all that kind of stuff, it's not necessarily bad. But if you don't have behind you, if you don't have like actual development, like threshold work behind you, then you find that you kind of crash and burn pretty quickly, or you just can't handle what's going on. Um,
Yeah. I,
That's what were you
yeah,
saying?
I saw that when, so I think his like overarching plan was just, all right, make it as intense as possible for most of the season. And then the last week to the last 2 weeks, we didn't do nearly as much. I don't even think we had like a serious workout that was like 5K pace before the state meet.
Right.
So
yeah.
in between our last two races, there wasn't a workout. I think the only workout was like a little bit of hill repeats, and that was it.
The
Um,
what were you saying, Nathan?
yeah. So, you're, but you said you're out of college or out of high school, right?
Yeah.
Okay. So I'll say this. I don't agree with that kind of method, right? You
Yeah.
know, if you're still in high school, I wouldn't say a lot against your coach, but it's just kind of not the way I would do it, right?
Yeah.
There are a few issues with it. If you want me to kind of go into it, I can, but it ultimately comes down to how you structure things, right? And so generally speaking, you want to, again, focus on development as much as you possibly can until that last phase where you're actually trying to force out whatever your peak fitness is. And so generally that's how I approach it and how I understand most people would. But again, if your coach has been coaching this way for the last 10 years, 15 years, they know what to get out of that system and they've seen what it can produce. So since I don't technically operate that way, maybe there's some things where I'm like, oh wow, that actually does work well. But it's not how I would do it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. It worked for me in a way, but at the same time, it was like I always felt a little bit fitter. Like I would do these workouts where I'm doing 5:03, 5:06 pace for miles with like 90 seconds rest, and I feel decent. Like I feel good. And then I would get into these races and be like, I already feel flat. Like I already don't feel great going into it. I
Yeah.
remember my PR race, 16:13. I was upset when I finished because that was the race that I was like, okay, time to break school record. I want to get this done. And then I actually got into the race and I was like, I feel good the first mile. And then after that, I was like, I already feel like I'm
Right.
starting to push it too hard.
Mhm.
But
I'll
Yeah.
say one thing too, because I already told Nathan about like some of the CR training because like that's what he's on because like we went to the same high school and like it's
Right.
really not good. Like if I'm just being honest, like it's really just not good training. But
yeah.
it works for like one or two people. Like it's the type of training that I had at Campbell. Kelvin, obviously you weren't there when I was at Campbell.
Yeah.
They would just basically throw you to the dogs and like if you survive type thing. And I mean
Mhm.
like it works for some people. It works for very talented people. But if you're not, this very talented guy who's very fast with these very fast, PRs and you can handle a lot, like you're done. And that was kind
Yeah.
of just what happened to me. Like I at Campbell, I kind of like just got
Mhm.
thrown to the wolves and eaten alive. Like
Yeah,
I
that's how
didn't,
it was. Yeah. That's
yeah.
true.
So
Yeah.
I mean that's how
Even
like
our time, that's how it was. I mean, we were just thrown in there with like some top-notch NCAA guys, the likes of Lawrence, the likes of Amon. Um, and we just had to grind it out. I remember I was doing um, you know, mile runs, like 10-mile runs, I think in under 6.
All the
per
time.
mile.
It would
Yeah,
always be under 6
under
minute
an
pace for
hour.
10
You
miles,
gotta knock
bro.
it out under an hour every day
That
for runs.
yeah, that happens so much with high school and college programs where it's like they're
Yeah.
basing your training off of like the
Other
top
people.
guys.
Mhm.
And it's like they need to grow at their own level for a
Mhm.
bit. And maybe
Yeah.
they can get to that point in their junior, senior year, but as a freshman, they just can't do that.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I remember
That's true.
yeah, we were doing like morning 6 a.m. Like repeats, mile repeats on the grass, and he
I
would have
remember that.
us do like 440s.
I
And
was, yeah.
Oh,
yeah, you can imagine doing 6 repeats at 440-mile pace.
That's like what Nathan does.
Like knocks you out, like
I
you're going
can't
to class dead. Yeah.
Dude, yeah, because all the workouts are in the AM too. It's like 6:30 a.m. workouts on wet grass. Like that's always the
Mhm.
worst feeling when you're
Yeah,
running.
makes it really hard. But I can't. I don't think I can. I cannot go ahead and say it didn't work. It worked for some people, including me. Like that coach literally moved me from a 800-meter runner to running a 10K under 28. So it worked to some extent, but at a very huge cost.
It
Yeah.
it depends on your biomechanics, and it also even the people that it does work on, it can start to lead to issues. Because
Yeah,
like
yeah, I had a lot of injuries.
like my coach in track, I haven't even talked about track yet. That was the worst of it. What I just talked about with cross country, that wasn't even the worst of it.
Wow.
Because track, I had a different coach, and he
Mhm.
was 800-meter specialist. He was the state record holder, 149 as a high schooler back in the day. And there was one guy on our team. His name was Ian Kane. People on the YouTube can look his name up.
Yeah, he's
Ian
good on the
Kane.
YouTube channel.
Mhm.
He's a fast guy. He
Mhm.
runs. I think his PR now is 152 in the 800
Yeah.
as a senior in high school. So
That's good.
good runner.
Mhm.
But by the end, he wasn't consistent. He didn't even make state. I mean, he didn't even make meet a champs. He made it to states, got swallowed up in state, and didn't win. And I remember I talked to him afterward. I was like, it just wasn't your fault. And I had the same thing happen to me, except it was even worse because I was doing higher mileage, like higher mileage events. I went to conferences, and I guess the training we were doing was so intense that I think a good way to see if your training is too intense is if you're getting injured or if you're getting sick. And I've
Right.
noticed that every single season since sophomore year, I have gotten sick every single season, besides the summers, because the summers is when
Whole
you do
team,
more.
too.
Yeah, the summers is when you do more easy mileage. Or in my junior and senior year, that was when I was starting to, mainly senior year, I was starting to incorporate threshold.
Mhm.
And during the summer, when I was doing threshold and only threshold, I felt amazing. I was the best on the team for a good bit of time. I felt fine. And then it hit where it's like, okay, now I'm continuing to do this mileage when I have like 8 weeks of this season left and I'm doing mile repeats like once or twice a week. And
Yeah,
in
it just
track,
doesn't cut it.
we would do broken 1600s and broken 800s like twice, 3 times a week. And
Mhm.
then when we would do races, we would usually have 2 a week, and one of them would always be a dual meet where I would quadruple events every time. It was always 4x8, 1600, 3200, and then a 4x4, literally 5 minutes after the 3200.
Hmm.
And that was the schedule I went through. And then there was always another race that was later in the week that was 2. I would always do the mile and the 2 mile. And it worked technically, but I didn't PR by nearly as much as I wanted to. I went from a 446 to a 439. And it's like, I'm not going into track thinking, oh, yeah, I want to break 7 seconds as a 446 miler. Like, I want to get down to the 420s. And it's like, nope.
I think,
Yeah.
yeah, I mean, doing 6 events a week is probably not ideal.
Yeah,
For
I don't know
like the
what
legs.
Nathan thinks, from a professional standpoint. You think like more rest can actually actualize your PR?
So here's what I'll say, because I coach a high school team as well.
Mhm.
So like the biggest thing with honestly with running in general, things like sprinting, things like even the 800,
Mhm.
I can get behind that you need like a lot of intensity to get to that peak moment.
Right.
Because of the races, there's such high intensity that
And
you need
such
a
little
lot of it
volume.
to
Mhm.
get to that point. But ultimately for high schoolers, young athletes, the more you focus on development and the less you race, the better times you're going to have. Now you have to fit that into the reality that you're on a high school team, they need you to score points, all this
Mhm.
kind of stuff, because even though you want to hit these times, you can't quite get away from the fact that even though you can, because it feels like you're not quite on a team sometimes when you're thinking about your stuff, you're still part of that reality. So sometimes it's not always going to fit, but if you have like, and again, I'm not here to say anybody's coaching philosophy isn't good, or it can't work because there's a lot of things I still don't know.
Mhm.
Um, but like I would say, if you're doing intensity, you've already numbered how long you have before you peak out and your body starts rejecting what you're gonna do, right? Like I would say if you're incorporating any kind of anything faster than threshold,
Mhm.
you have like 8, maybe 10 weeks max before your body um kind of rejects that and you start seeing like worse times or you're consistently tired and all that kind of stuff. So,
Right. I kind of
That's true.
have another one more question. Just one more. I was gonna ask you, do you think um with college and high school in the US, right, where we are training athletes to run as a team? I know there's a team building reasoning for that, like to kind of have people that can reason out as a team. Do you think that also affects like individual performances for athletes? Like because we don't tier the training towards an individual rather than like a team. Do you think that
yeah,
has an effect? Mhm.
Yeah, so it's really hard, right? So
Mhm.
like if you have a really good coach, they're going to focus on how to get the most out of each individual athlete. Like
Mhm.
in anything, a really good coach is going to do that. However, you have to realize that there's only so much attention that a coach can give to somebody, and odds are he's going to give the most attention to the best athletes,
Right.
right? And so things
Mhm.
are gonna kind of warp around them.
Mhm.
Um, but
Yeah.
but yeah, I guess that's what I
Okay.
would
Okay.
say.
We have about 30